Sounds like Apple got into a little bit of trouble this week thanks to a pair of developers out of Canada and Germany. They've uncovered that back in iOS 14.6, it looks like the App Store app was sending just about every tap, everything that you did within the app, sending that data along to Apple, along with a consistent ID number and a number of items that could allow them to basically profile your device and potentially be used to track your movements and information across multiple Apple apps. One of the developers who uncovered this is Tommy Misk, who is actually same guy that uncovered way back when, you might remember this, where Apple was in their apps bypassing VPN. So if you had a VPN turned on, they would still be sending data back to Apple outside of the VPN tunnel, which was really not cool. Apple, I think, ultimately ended up fixing that, but it was based on Tommy's research. And so he's at it again, looking at what kinds of data Apple's sending back, and they also noticed that there was similar behavior in other Apple apps. The Music app, TV, Books, iTunes Store, and the stock apps all send back data to Apple, and a lot of data, seemingly excessive data, and it's not really clear why they're doing that. Apple hasn't really responded to this yet, so very interesting. Fortunately, they also looked at the health and wallet apps and found that those apps are transmitting no data at all, so that's a good thing. You wouldn't want that going on. But the trouble here, I think, for Apple is they've made a big deal recently out of this idea that, they're the company that's going to respect and value your privacy. And to make matters worse on this story, Apple's tracking seems to completely ignore any of their privacy settings, like opting out of tracking or turning on or turning off, rather, the personalization settings. So, they're not supposed to be profiling you for ads and things if you turn off the personalization settings, or if you're opting out of tracking, then you're supposed to be opted out of tracking. But it seems like Apple's not applying the rules to themselves, only to third-party apps. And of course, the news of this has triggered a lawsuit in California, a class action lawsuit. So I think that's to be expected. But yeah, this is not looking good. Now, some of you might be saying, well, Adam, this is only iOS 14.6, which is an old operating system. Maybe they're not doing that anymore. And it looks like there is some evidence that they could be sending similar types of data even in iOS 16. It's not confirmed, but it's possible that they've turned this on and they're not turning it off. They haven't sort of moved away from it. And remember that it was in iOS 14.5, the one right before the one they were testing here, where Apple introduced those stricter anti-tracking measures for third-party apps. So not applying the rules to themselves, making them immune to their own app tracking transparency policy, is not a good look for Apple. And I think they're right to be called out on something like this. And another interesting part of the story that came out is that, Apple has an internal ad sales team, and they're being told to kind of change some terminology or avoid specific terminology when talking about how Apple is doing advertising. And I think it says a lot about how Apple is trying to maybe set different rules or just avoid certain terms that might be controversial, even though they might actually be doing some of these practices. So it says that they've been told to use the term, for example, audience refinement instead of targeting, or to refer to their platform instead of an algorithm that might be analyzing data to do tracking. And then there's a term called, I guess, conquesting, and I was not familiar with this term until I read it in the piece, but apparently that means the practice of showing your ads or your buyer's ads rather than their competitors when someone searches for a specific term. So Apple's sales team in that scenario has been said, hey, use a term like competitor keywords or brand defense. So trying to put more of a positive spin on those terms, but they all ultimately mean the same thing. And obviously to do that kind of tracking and to build algorithms and things like that, you're going to need data. And so this very much looks like Apple is collecting that data internally. And even if they are using it internally, they've still sort of told us as consumers, as users of these devices, that, hey, we respect your privacy. If you choose to not opt into these things, we're not going to be doing it. And this seems to contradict that. So, not really a good look. And it really does seem even more nefarious in light of a lot of the recent reports that we've talked about on this podcast where Apple has said that they want to significantly expand their ad business. Now, something that did come out this week that's a little bit more interesting on that side of the story is there were new details from the site, The Information, that kind of contradict some of those earlier reports. According to their sources, they say that Apple is satisfied with the current state of their advertising revenue growth, and they're not looking to make any changes in the volume of ads presented on their devices and iPhones and things like that. And this new report does seem to jive with some earlier reports I think we talked about a few years back where Apple had possibly been looking into adding ads into features like Siri Spotlight searches. So you would do a search result and then they would sell kind of, sponsored results within that search. They had been looking into that and had kind of decided not to move forward with that. And the sources for The Information told them similar things, that they had those plans, but they completely scrapped that. So it's unclear what Apple's up to. It seems like, I think a lot of the revenue growth on the app side is going to happen maybe over on Apple TV and with things like their new sports offerings, which are going to have, built-in ads, and Apple can sell ads into that to kind of generate more revenue. Hopefully they're not going to be bombarding this with more ads within our apps, although we had heard, right, that they're looking to maybe doing some of the App Store style ads for book publishers or podcasters like myself. So podcasters would be able to buy ad space and kind of promote their ads within the podcasting app, and same thing where book authors within the books app and things like that. I think that might naturally happen. I don't know how I feel about that right now, but definitely I feel very strongly that Apple, if they're positioning themselves to be a company that protects our security and privacy and is not going to do ad tracking without our consent, they need to apply those rules equally across the board. And when stuff like this gets uncovered, I think we should definitely scrutinize it and look into it. So it'll be interesting to see. I hope Apple responds to this in some sort of public way now that this information has come out. Likely they're just going to stay quiet, but we'll have to wait and see. But interesting development this week nonetheless.